Hello, welcome to the Watershed. I'm Pastor Mike. The Watershed is a safe place to figure out how to navigate those moments in life that change everything thereafter. Christmas is exactly one of those moments. Christmas was the birth of a baby that divided all of time into BC and AD. And for many of us, this is a season that is a watershed season, because we decide if it will be peace on earth, joy for all men, or if we'll be captured and captivated by the problems that we faced in our own lives in the past. It's the Christmas season, but for a long time now, it's been the COVID season, hasn't it? And some of us are going into Christmas without people that we love, without people that we care deeply about. So we come to this season knowing that it can define us or we can define it. In fact, if I say Bethlehem, what are the images that come to your mind? Probably images of a baby in a manger with a virgin and a man standing behind her by the name of Joseph, right? But before Bethlehem ever appears in the New Testament, it appeared in the book of Genesis. And before it was a place of birth, it was a place of burial. And that's what I want to talk to you about. Before Bethlehem was the place of the birth of Jesus, it was the place of the death of a beloved wife. Her name was Rachel. Her husband's name was Jacob. Jacob is one of the great-great-grandfathers of Jesus. And in Bethlehem, he faces one of his most difficult moments. You might say a watershed moment, a momentous occasion. And when we use that term momentous, what we're saying is it's a moment that changes momentum. Both of those words are captured in this idea. And Jacob has to decide what going forward from a place of burial will look like. That's what I want you to take a look with me in the book of Genesis. Then they moved on from Bethel. While they were still some distance from Ephrath, Rachel began to give birth, and she had great difficulty. The midwife said, "Do not despair, you have another son." As she breathed her last, for she was dying, she named her son Benoni, but his father named him Benjamin. Now, this is a story of Bethlehem, and I'm going to show you that in just a little bit. When Rachel gives birth to this baby, she names the baby Benoni. Now, Benoni means son of my pain. But the Bible says that the baby's father named him Benjamin. Now, Benjamin means son of my right hand. Now, that's a huge difference. The son of my right hand. The right hand in antiquity represented the place of blessing, the place of honor, the place of power. It was sort of a vice president, president in the middle, vice president at the right hand, king in the middle, prince at the right hand. Jacob realized that he had a responsibility to this young man, that he was raising the 12 leaders of the 12 tribes of Israel, and one of them was Benjamin. Now, Rachel, understandably, in her duress, knowing that she was dying and knowing that she was suffering, she names the baby that was being born after the circumstances of the moment. However, her husband has the foresight to realize that this baby has a future. And this baby's future should not be defined by the pain of the baby's birth. You know, what we call the moment goes a long way to define how we come out of the moment. Jacob realized that he could move into bitterness, pain, anger, despair. But he chose instead to name the boy something different than son of my pain. How you define the moment goes a long way to determine how the moments define you. If you're not careful, You will name the baby according to the circumstances, and your future will be dictated by your past. Now, Jacob, as we saw, had worked 14 years for Rachel, and now he's losing the love of his life. This moment was horrific and tragic for Jacob. But Jacob refused to let this moment of loss determine the outcome of his life. This moment would change everything. He would never hold Rachel again. He would never kiss Rachel again. He would never lay his eyes on the love of his life. This was a moment of loss. But Jacob realized that this could be a moment of loss, or Jacob could be lost. And this is what happens in these watershed, momentous occasions. We can define them, or they can define us. Jacob decided that he would determine how things would change. Oh, this moment would certainly change everything, but Jacob would determine the change that would take place. Nothing and no one would ever be the same. That's what these watershed moments are like. They change everything. They change the way that we know places. If I say the words Pearl Harbor or Hiroshima, certain images come to your mind because those very places are marked by what took place in a horrific circumstance, but not so with Bethlehem. Take a look, verse number 19. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath. And then in parentheses, the next words are, that is Bethlehem. Jacob loses the love of his life and buries his wife at Bethlehem. But when I say the word Bethlehem to you, you do not conjure images of a gravestone or a funeral. Bethlehem is not marked by death. Bethlehem is not marked by burial. Bethlehem is marked by birth. You see, what we call the moment goes a long way to determine how the moment affects our future. Often, our greatest moments of pain can become our greatest moments of purpose. And we get to decide. What happens to me is not nearly as important as what happens in me. We get to decide how the moment affects our future. If it becomes a death sentence or a birth, a catastrophe or a catalyst. Watershed moments change the way we see people. One person named the son, son of my pain. The other person named the son, son of my right hand. Watershed moments change the way we see places. Bethlehem, place of burial or place of birth. But I want you to see this. Watershed moments can define the way that we see us, the way that we see ourselves. If we're not careful, we will see ourselves through the lens of pain perpetually. U2 had a great song out years ago that talked about getting stuck in a moment that you can't get out of. And life is a series of moments that create momentum. But momentum can stop in a moment, and everything can stagnate if we're not careful. If we let the moments define us, because either the moment will define us or we will define the moment. So it's Christmas, and we all face this moment, this season differently. Some of us have lost very dear loved ones to COVID. Many of us are facing times of great questioning, of doubt, of uncertainty. So we enter this season of joy and peace on earth with a certain sense of grief in many cases. In reality, you will define the season. It's up to you what this season is. Everyone has loss. Everyone has pain. But what do you name the baby? What do you name the place? How does the event affect what you call yourself? One of my favorite movie makers, writers, directors is Tyler Perry. And he's famous for playing a character called Medea. And Medea once said to a little girl in one of the films, "It ain't what folks call you, it's what you answer to that matters." You see, it's not what other people call you, it's what you call you that makes the difference. So take a look at Jacob and his response to this tragic loss. The Bible says that Jacob erected a monument at Rachel's tomb. And then the next sentence says, but Israel moved on. Now, Jacob is the name of a person, and Israel is the name of the same person. And God has a habit of changing our identity, but the problem is we have the power to disagree with God about what our identity is. Jacob, by definition, means supplanter. Now, that's kind of a word that we don't use, but let me give you a really basic definition. It's a person who's willing to pull up your plant so they can plant their plant where your plant used to be. It's a person who's willing to undercut you, uproot you, and throw you away so that they can take your place of fruitfulness. And this is exactly who Jacob had been. Jacob is the guy who bought his brother's birthright with a bowl of beans. Jacob is a guy who's pretended to be someone that he wasn't all of his life. And now he faces the decision, who will I be? You answer that question in your most painful moments. Who will I be? Will this moment define me? Or will I define this moment? Israel is completely different. Israel literally means prince with God. Now, God called Jacob Israel after he had wrestled and fought against God all night long. If we're not careful, our fighting, our wrestling with God will define us. By God's grace, God chose to call Jacob Israel, prince with God. So Jacob faces this tragic moment, and he names the baby. In the face of his wife dying and naming the baby a name of pain, he says, no, we're not going to call the baby that. We're going to call him the son of my right hand. In a moment when he could have drifted back into his old ways of doubt and fear and the behaviors born of doubt and fear, he says, no, I will be Israel. He leaves his wife's tomb without allowing that tomb to define his identity. So here's the thought that I want to leave you with today. The facts of Jacob's circumstance were not nearly as important as the faith that Jacob chose. You can be defined by the facts of your situation or the faith that you choose. You can be defined by your past, or you can define your future. But you'll never live your destiny until you can let go of your history. So, I want you to think about Bethlehem, the place of burial or the place of birth. You know, the old cliche is we get bitter or we get better. That's good, but I think we can do better. I think in reality, those moments, they can either bury us or they can birth us. Jesus said that except the seed falls to the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it falls to the ground, it's buried, it dies, it's buried, then it produces a harvest. So we get to decide. The painful moments when we fall, the painful moments when we feel like we're dying, the painful moments that we've lost, they can be either the place of pain or the place of purpose. You decide.